Joining us right now is Glenn Hutchins. He is North Island Chairman. He's also a director at the New York Fed. He wrote an op-ed last week in the Wall Street Journal with former NEC Director Gary Cohn entitled "The Fed's New Mission to Save the Economy." He also serves on the board of New York Presbyterian, which is in the hot zone right now. And Glenn, I hope we could start with that, just kind of giving an update on what you can tell us on what's happening here in New York, because some of the numbers we've been seeing have been fairly optimistic, just in terms of hospitalization numbers actually dropping and intubations, too.
So one of the leaders of the hospital system in New York said this week that we're at the end of the beginning. And I think that's really important. As we've talked through this crisis, I've reminded you each time we talked that this is a healthcare crisis leading to economic and market consequences. And we need to start with where we are in the shape of the healthcare crisis. It feels that statement makes it feel to me like the first phase of this crisis, which was flattening the curve, is now in hand. And we now have to move on to the phases that involve deploying testing, continuing to build a healthcare capacity, continuing physical distancing plus contact tracing, and then the things you've talked about today, the therapies and the vaccines. But to be through this first phase, not unlike what's happened before us in Italy and China, is a very important landmark that is a cause for some hope that we will be able to see the light at the end of this tunnel. And I think that's worth pausing on for a moment.
Yeah, I think that's great news. You think that this is a situation where we can open the economy maybe beginning of May, middle of May, end of May?
It's very hard now it's very hard now to predict that. You know, the AEI, slightly right of center, Center for American Progress, slightly left of center, have come out with plans over the course of the last week about what we do to reopen. So it's important to start talking about that. Those plans, the next steps in those plans involve deploying testing. We don't have a sense now of when we can deploy the testing. I've heard numbers like we need to go from roughly 150,000 a day to 500 to 750,000 per day. That might take another 45 days, I understand, to get that out there. And then we also need to build hospital capacity, not just ventilators, but also continuing with ICUs, healthcare workers, and PPE for them. And right now, for instance, there's a big dialysis shortage, so there are shortages like that will come up. Then we need to get to being able to get back out in society, which will have continuing physical distancing and contact tracing plus isolation. And then once we have therapies and vaccines, we really get going again. So it's hard now to attach timelines to each of those, except now the first step in the timeline appears to be one that we've accomplished. And that's very good news.
Glenn, we got some economic numbers today. The March retail sales came in down 8.5%, a little worse than had been expected, although the expectation was down 8%, I think. And then the Empire State Survey came in and showed a number of negative 78.2. I don't think I ever recall seeing numbers like that. Probably not surprised when you have these stay-in-place orders that are out there. But I guess that brings us to how things are faring, how the bank programs are doing at this point in terms of trying to get support to the small and medium and even large size businesses out there. What do you hear?
Well, look, I think the people are focused on individual pieces of this. Let's look at the entire corpus for a moment. There is roughly $1.2 trillion in support that's flowing out in 4 different packages to important parts of our economy. We've talked a lot about the PPP. I've seen you talk about it on this show. That is $350 billion. The airlines support program, which is being administered by Treasury, another $50 billion. Then you have the Main Street programs, which are just now being deployed, which is $600 billion, not getting enough attention relative to its size, much larger than the PPP program. And then another $600 billion being deployed, having been deployed already in the corporate credit facilities programs. So there's $1.2 trillion of support to the corporate market being deployed right now. And that's in addition to the general programs that have been out there for a couple of weeks now supporting the markets that fund creditworthy companies. So there's a massive, unprecedented support for corporate financing being scaled up right now. And if you look at it in totality, it's really quite impressive. And, you know, there's been a lot of problems with the PPP program in terms of implementation, but one of the reasons why it's had implementation problem is it's had overwhelming demand, which suggests that it can have a potential for a really substantial impact. Will we need more from that? Yes. Have we been able to scale up a program like that pretty quickly in a way that we'll look back on and think that was pretty good, even though there were some fits and starts along the way? I think so. So I think the overall programs that have been scaled are unprecedented. There's opportunity to do more if necessary. The Treasury Exchange Stabilization Fund still has dry powder, which means they can combine with the Fed to do more. But I think it's really, again, another hopeful sign that we're getting this stimulus out very, very quickly.
Glenn, we only have about 30 seconds left, but, with some of the hiccups we've seen along the way, you think it's more likely that we open the economy again or that some of these small businesses that have been waiting actually get their checks?
I think the small businesses that are waiting will get their checks. The programs are now starting to flow capital out. You're starting to hear about businesses that have received the money. And I think, it's of course going to take some time to scale up a new program and put $350 billion out to small businesses all across the country. And you feel bad for those businesses that have to wait. But on the other hand, you're also now starting to hear about it getting out there. I talked to one banker yesterday, and she told me that they have done 10 years worth of SBA business in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And that's a bad thing in terms of it got backed up. It's a good thing that they're getting it accomplished. 37,000 loans flowing through a pipeline that used to do 500 a year.